Welcome one, welcome all to the latest edition of the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Thursday, August the 8th. I'm Zach Ewing, along with a couple of our beat writers, Koki Riley and Reed Darcey, here today inside our Baton Rouge studios. And getting you set, just kind of recap the last week of camp, the first week of camp for LSU football, and looking forward to the next couple of weeks. It's kind of a long process, guys. You look forward to it, and you look forward to it, and you look forward to it, and then it starts, and it's exciting. And now we're kind of a week in, and I think the players are probably feeling this too, but it's like, oh, we got 3 more weeks of this.
It's a grind. You look at it and you're like, all right, it's only a month. It's not bad. But then once you get into it and you feel the heat and the humidity, it's a grind for sure. So it's only been a week.
Yeah. For me personally, I just want the games to start. And that's not just from, covering from an LSU perspective. I mean, just all of college football to start at this point, right? So, I sometimes I feel similarly when it comes to other sports and their elongated preseason times. So yeah.
Just bring us the games. I know fans think that way. Sometimes the media thinks that way too. I guarantee you the players think that way. Just get us through practice and let us hit somebody else.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But you're right. The heat. I talked to a couple of our Saints reporters out in Southern California, and they just rub it in, man. Selfies from the beach. Screenshots of the weather app. It's 74 degrees or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's 74 degrees is Celsius here.
And they're going to Dodgers games and Angels games.
Yeah, they're going to baseball games every night. Okay, all right, we get it.
Southern California is a fake place. I don't understand that.
All right, before we get started, we're going to talk some one-on-one drills today. We got to see some of those. These guys got to talk to Joe Sloan, the new LSU offensive coordinator. So we'll be discussing some of that. Want to let you know that our show today is brought to you by Waste Pro. Hey, Tigers fans, planning a tailgate or event? Keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. Guys, real quick, as we recap the first week of camp, before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty, what's an overarching takeaway that you've had that maybe you didn't know about LSU before camp started?
The defense has been pretty aggressive, just in general. I know Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator, has adopted this principle of no poodles on their defense. They even track the amount of times that a player maybe shies away from being aggressive or shies away from, I don't say contact because it's football, but I think sort of what I'm trying to get at, and they'll tally it down as it's 1 poodle for you.
Do they have basset hounds on the other side or something for aggression?
I don't think so. At least that's not what Jacoby and Guillory or anyone else said when we talked to the players on, what was that, Tuesday? Monday.
We got to find out. This is what the people need to know. What canine is on the other side of that equation?
Yeah, we'll try to figure that out. Yeah. See, this is real journalism right here. So I think that sort of aggressive mentality, something that we didn't see a lot of last year, in part because they were trying to, potentially hide some personnel deficiencies and just being a little bit more loose and lax, especially in coverage where they're giving up these 5-10 yard cushions, and giving up so many completions and long drives. And I don't think we're going to see that this year. I think we're going to see a very aggressive defense. I think we're going to, especially in the secondary, with their coverages. And I don't know. I don't know. There's just this air of aggression when it comes to the defense that has been paying off so far in camp. They've just been a lot more competitive in their one-on-ones, and they've been a lot more competitive and just being more aggressive. And that aggression has really just helped them keep up with the offense.
The Blake Baker philosophy is to create havoc, right?
Yes.
And so when you think, when you look at how things are going in camp, you look at the front seven, you look, how are they creating pressure in the pocket, and then you look at the secondary and how are they contesting throws, how closely are they guarding receivers, how closely are they covering them, and what kind of havoc are they creating in the secondary. So when the games start and LSU gets on the field and they play some real opponents, judge the Blake Baker defense by how much aggression and how much havoc it causes. That's the philosophy, and I think we've seen glimpses of that at camp. It's an encouraging sign, but the pads did only just come on yesterday, so we've got a long ways to go to sort of see how the defense acclimates to that.
Yeah, Paz just came on yesterday, and for those who don't know, y'all don't get to see all of practice, so it's hard to come up with these huge takeaways. This guy looks good. Well, he looked good in the 20% of practice we got to see. We don't know what happened in the other 80% of practice. We're extrapolating from that 20% of practice. So it's a little bit of a guessing game, but at least we can make some educated guesses for you. We're going to talk more about that and about press conference with Joe Sloan right after this word from one of our sponsors.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets, already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
This is the LSU Sports Insider Podcast for Thursday, August the 8th. Zach Ewing with Koki Riley and Reed Darcey. Guys, you got an opportunity to speak with Joe Sloan today. And there's been so much, not today, this week. There's been so much emphasis and attention paid to the changes LSU's making on the defensive side of the ball. And rightfully so. Like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, all of those cliches. That was the problem area last year. Koki, as you were just talking about, like that's what needs to be fixed. But this offense, I'm not sure if it's kind of going under the radar how much the offense may change. Obviously, Jayden Daniels is gone, but you have a new offensive coordinator as well. And the whole scheme is really going to change, Reed.
So what stood out to me from talking to Joe Sloan yesterday is what he said about the run game. I thought back to last year at this time, and the conversation around the offense was how much can they improve in the vertical passing game? You know, how much more explosive will the offense be? Will Jayden Daniels have more downfield accuracy? Will he be a more willing thrower, you know, of deep shots? Will the LSU offense be more aggressive, and will they take shots downfield? And obviously we saw how that worked out last year. And so this year, I guess the question offensively is how is the run game going to look different, right? So that's the main thing that they're changing this time around. And so Joe Sloan, he sort of shed some light as to, you know, LSU's playbook and what kind of areas that they have in the playbook, but that they didn't get to use last year. And so this year, he sort of dusted off some of their sections of the playbook just to better fit the personnel. And so what you're going to see in the run game, instead of like predominantly like the inside zone, the read options with Jayden Daniels and the design quarterback runs, you're going to see a lot of off-tackle runs. You're going to see a lot of outside zone. You're going to see a lot of counters, some tosses, some pitches. The guards are going to be pulling. The tackles are going to be rotating around. So it's going to be a different run game, and LSU is going to have to get most, if not all, of its rushing production from its running backs, as opposed to how it's been the last 2 years when Jayden Daniels was a leading rusher through his design runs and his scrambles as well. So the run game is going to look different. Joe Sloan said that the new concepts that they're spending preseason camp installing have always been a part of the playbook, but now they're sort of, I guess, going over that part of the playbook again and trying to install it and trying to add it back into the offense. And so we haven't, again, since the pads came on yesterday, and we only get these little brief glimpses of 11 on 11 work. We haven't seen a whole lot of what it looks like, but we have talked to Will Campbell and we have talked to players like Jacoby and Guillory and Greg Penn. They've all said, yeah, the run game is going to be different, the offense is going to be different, and those are the ways that it will look different.
Yeah, I think Reed explained that beautifully, and it sounds like Will Campbell in particular is pretty excited to be running this sort of new scheme with the running game and being able to show his athleticism out in space as a puller, as a blocker, and I think we're also, to just sort of add on to that point, I think we're going to see more wide receiver screens this season too. I mean, that's something they've showed a little bit at practice while we've been out there, and I think when you have as many dynamic athletes as LSU has, and you can put them out in space, you know, I think of a guy who isn't even technically a top 3 receiver, and Aaron Anderson, and just getting the ball in his hands on outside the numbers, that just seems like a smart thing to do. So I think you're just going to see a more concerted effort to get, you know, different guys involved in space when it comes to the receiving core as well.
You talked about the defense and being more aggressive and trying to stop these long methodical drives. On the other side of the ball, it almost seems like the offense may be gearing more toward, let's have these methodical drives where we're always going to be ahead of the sticks, and we're going to be in 2nd and 3 and 3rd and 1, and maybe there won't be as many big plays as Jayden Daniels created, but the offense is more efficient down to down, or as efficient down to down? I mean, am I on the right track there?
I think that's a very interesting point, because what we've actually seen from practice is a lot of dink and dunk, a lot of passes that are only 5-10 yards, even less. The screens, the running game, like all these things that would suggest that they're going to have this more methodical approach. But then you look at Garrett Nussmeier's history as a quarterback. He's a big game hunter, right? He's got a big arm. He likes to push the ball on field. We saw that in the bowl game. We've seen that throughout his entire LSU career, whether it's practices or the few times he's played in the games. Like if you just watch the SEC championship game tape, he's chucking 40-yard passes downfield against the best defense in the country. So I think there's going to be a healthy blend between those two. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing so much stuff underneath so far, and all these new things in the running game, these wide receiver screens, is in order to sort of like incorporate that into the offense and make these guys very comfortable with that, so it can help open up the real strength, I think, of what this offense is, which is deep shots, because they have all these talented receivers. They have all these plays from the playbook from when Jayden was the quarterback, obviously, and they have a quarterback who has probably a better arm than Jayden Daniels has right now, which is really saying something, because obviously Daniels became a deep ball master by the end of last season.
Yeah, and the receivers have shown that they can get open in those tight spaces, on those short and intermediate routes. We've seen a lot of Mason Taylor this camp. He's caught a ton of passes from Garrett Nussmeier. He's been very involved in the offense, as opposed to last year when he was sort of an afterthought behind Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and Kyron Lacy. So he's been really involved. Chris Hilton, we usually think of him as just a deep threat, a speedy guy who can get behind the defense, but he's done a lot of work in the short and intermediate areas. So that's a sort of added element of growth that we've seen from him. We haven't seen a whole lot of that from him throughout his career. And then Kyron Lacy and CJ Daniels, the Liberty transfer, they've done a good job getting open as well. And so the LSU has the weapons, and they've got the sort of talent there that they need. Now it's just molding those weapons and molding that talent into the best cohesive offense that fits the personnel, because the personnel is different than it was last year. And so now that they're starting to spend preseason camp, fall camp, trying to reorient the offense around the new personnel.
Yeah, and it could be, Koki, what you're saying is you dink and you dunk and you soften the defense up and get some of those linebackers and safeties to suck in, and then you hit them deep. Maybe not as aggressive as last year, maybe not as aggressive as Garrett Nussmeier was down 2 touchdowns against Georgia, when he was just, hey, go out there and see what you could do. But it's not like that element's not going to be there at all.
Yeah, and I think they know that, or at least what my guess would be is that it's not going to be quite as easy to get those deep shots this season, because there's obviously the precedent of what they did last year, but also Jayden made that stuff easier just because of how good of a runner he was. And a lot of LSU's offense last year, even when they wouldn't necessarily hit the deep shot, is they'd create all this space in the middle of the field because all their receivers were way downfield, and Jayden would just run his way out of it and run for 20, 30 yards because that's how good of a runner he was, right? It was almost like you had this automatic safe valve option if the 40-yard pass downfield wasn't necessarily open, even when it usually was open. So when you don't have that option anymore, you don't have that I guess, quote unquote, cheat code with that, potential read option plays and all these different things. And when you have to sort of like run a more traditional style of offense underneath, right? The screens, the running games, the gap schemes, the options, right? You have to master those things, right, in order to get back to the strength of your team, which is those deep passes downfield.
Sure. All right, you're watching the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Subscribe to the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel for us. Tell your friends about it. We're going to be here twice a week all the way through the school year, basically. So football season, basketball season, into baseball season. Hit on gymnastics as well, as whatever else is going on in the LSU sports world. So hit the like button if you like the content. Continue to listen. We appreciate you. Want to hit on one more point with Joe Sloan, guys. And that's actually going to be today's recruiting segment. And even though it's kind of a slow time in the recruiting calendar, there's a different kind of recruiting in college football these days, and that's what we're going to talk about. Today's recruiting segment is proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. And, look, what I'm talking about is not recruiting high school kids and not necessarily even the transfer portal. Sometimes you have to re-recruit the guys on your roster. And Garrett Nussmeier has talked about this, how instrumental Joe Sloan was in getting him to stay. Like, he knew he wasn't going to start last year. A lot of other quarterbacks in his position would have gone and found another spot. Garrett Nussmeier absolutely could have started for quite a few different Power 5 teams last year. He chose to stay here in part because of Joe Sloan. And that's what I'm talking about with this kind of re-recruiting your own roster and getting them to see the big picture.
And now LSU has a starting quarterback because of that.
Right.
Ever since Garrett Nussmeier went to the Manning Passing Academy in June, every time we've talked to him, he's sort of mentioned the idea that he has a awesome relationship with Joe Sloan, and that one of the reasons why he stayed at LSU and did not enter the transfer portal was because he had that relationship, right? And with Joe Sloan elevated to play caller alongside Cortez Hankton, the old receivers coach, now the co-offensive coordinator, Sloan was going to be more involved, and so he had an opportunity to build an even stronger connection with Nussmeier. So that's one of the main reasons why Nussmeier is currently the starting quarterback at LSU and why he's going into his first fall camp as the starter. That's really important. Think about where LSU would be if Nussmeier had transferred. If they hadn't had him, you lose Jayden Daniels, and then who do you have behind him? There's not a whole lot there. You would have had to go to the transfer portal, which is not a given that you could get somebody trustworthy, reliable who could fill that void. So now it's just going to sort of be translating that relationship that we know Nussmeier and Sloan have off the field. The challenge now will be translating that onto the field, and so that's what we'll be looking for throughout the rest of camp.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I think LSU in general has done a pretty good job of retaining the guys that they have to retain. There's really only a very small handful of names that guys who could have really helped out this year's team who have left. I mean, Lance Hurd's the one name that really sort of pops to mind, but there really aren't a ton others. So I just think in general they've done a pretty good job of retainment, given the fact that I think most schools probably haven't done as good of a job.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, I think that, Reed, you're right. That could pay benefits even ongoing now. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier is certainly not transferring now. You don't have to recruit him anymore. But that relationship that he has with his position coach, with his offensive coordinator, when times get tough, when a couple things go wrong in a game, that's the kind of thing that builds a foundation that allows you to get past that and keep performing.
Yeah, and looking to the future, LSU has currently the number one high school player in the country, Bryce Underwood. He's committed to LSU right now, and if he makes it to campus, then he'll be the best player LSU has ever signed, best quarterback at least that LSU has ever signed in program history. And Joe Sloan is obviously playing a role in his recruitment, right? So this is where LSU is positioned with him as your play caller, as your OC. LSU is recruiting the quarterback position, retaining the talent they have on the quarterback position in a way that they really hadn't before until Brian Kelly took over.
All right, we're going to pivot here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast and let you know that the Queen of Baton Rouge proudly sponsors the LSU Sports Insiders sports betting segment with Thomas Casale. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. And here's Thomas telling you a little bit about sports betting this week.
Thanks, guys. Well, college football season doesn't start here for a couple of weeks, but the first football we can bet on is preseason NFL football that starts this week. Now, I know some people might think it's insanity to bet on glorified practices, but the reality is you can find some edges in these preseason games. There's different variables to look at. One of the obvious ones is quarterbacks, see how long they're going to play. One of the things about quarterbacks that's interesting, it's not just the quarterback. It's if a team's going to leave a starter, a semi-starter, or a quality backup in the game, they're not going to have the third team O-line in there. They're not going to have 7 and 8 team receivers who aren't going to make the team. Those guys are commodities. They don't want them to get injured, so they're going to surround them with people who are actually going to make the roster. So the longer quarterbacks play is a big factor. Now, another big factor is coaching. Some coaches want to win in the preseason and some don't. I think the most famous case is Ravens head coach John Harbaugh, who is an insane 40-20 against the spread in his 60 preseason games with the Ravens. And as we know, gamblers have ridden the Harbaugh train the last few years when this became a thing. Now, last year they actually went 1-2 and 0-3 against the spread. So people have kind of caught on with it, but he tries to win preseason games. Bettors love betting them. We've already seen a lot of money on the Ravens-Eagles preseason game. And the interesting thing is pro bettors now go the other way. They actually fade Harbaugh, and we see the Eagles as a 1-point favorite in Baltimore. So we kind of got a pros versus Joes thing going there, something interesting to watch. And on the other end, you got a guy like Dan Quinn, new head coach with Washington. His preseason record is 6-15. And if you remember Dan Quinn back when he was with Atlanta, he didn't really put a lot of stock in the preseason. You know, he took his guys out early. And one of the things about preseason too, about winning these games, it comes down to the fourth quarter. It's how you play defense. You ever watch the Ravens play defense in the fourth quarter? They're blitzing. They're trying to protect leads. Some of these coaches are playing vanilla. They just want to get out of there. They've seen their evaluations and move forward. That's kind of what Dan Quinn does. Now, a game I think is interesting is between two coaches who don't have a long preseason history. That's the Vikings and the Raiders. But Kevin O'Connell for Minnesota has been there 2 years. He's 0-6 straight up in the preseason and 1-5 against the spread. And if you watch Minnesota, you can tell they're not all that interested in the second half. They're trying to get the game over with. And Antonio Pierce, who has never coached a preseason game, but anyone who's ever been around Pierce, or if you've seen him on the sidelines, you know the intense kind of guy he is. And you can just see he's one of those winning matter preseason coaches. Now, the line has already been adjusted for this theory. It's Raiders are 3.5 on the road at Minnesota. But I think when you look at those coaching styles and how the Raiders are going to approach this game, I think there's some value there. So if you're looking for some action this weekend, in the first week of preseason, I recommend Las Vegas minus 3.5 over Minnesota.
Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or a signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. All right, guys, so as we move on here on the LSU Sports Insider, another thing you got to see this week in practice was some one-on-one drills. And those are always interesting because it's really man on man. Who's better for this rep? Who's better for that rep? Something that I think football fans can relate to from the junior high level all the way up to the NFL. It's like sometimes football can be a one-on-one game. So specifically, read what you guys got to see with some wide receiver versus DB reps and some O-line versus D-line reps. What stood out to you?
I'm going to give you two names, and they're names that LSU fans know pretty well. One is Kyron Lacey and one is Ashton Stamps. They went against each other yesterday, and I thought it was a pretty fun rep. Kyron Lacey is LSU's number one receiver, and through the first week of camp, Ashton Stamps has been LSU's number one corner. So we're going mano a mano here, strength on strength, and it was a really competitive rep. Lacey ran a good route. He did a good job trying to create separation, but Stamps really stuck with him. He covered him well. He was right there with him. So up until that point, it was sort of like a double move with a little go kind of element to it. And Stamps stuck with him, but Lacey made a really great catch above. So until the catch, it would have sort of been like a tie, the rep, but Lacey just came away with awesome catch, just with stamps blanketed all over him, and he got his feet in bounds still. So it was a really impressive rep. I was impressed by both of them. Came away impressed by Stamps as well, because it's been consistent throughout camp. He's been flashing, he's been popping, he's been making good plays. He's got a couple interceptions, a few pass breakups. So he's been playing really well. We've seen a lot of growth from him, and from Kyron Lacy, we've seen what we've expected to see. Him sort of stepping into that number one role and showing what he's capable of. He's come down with a few tough contested grabs. He hasn't dropped any passes. We haven't seen him drop in anything, and that was a big sort of concern with him throughout his career, is that he kind of struggled with drops. We haven't seen that. So we've seen some growth from both of them, and I thought it was cool to see that all come to a head with that one-on-one rep yesterday.
How about on the lines? Koki, what sticks out to you on the lines?
Yeah, on the lines, got to watch that fairly closely yesterday, and Will Campbell and Garrett Dellinger were as dominant as ever. But on the flip side, the defensive line had some wins. I mean, Jacoby and Guillory and Gio Paez had some wins against some starters, and Savion Jones got the best of Emory Jones twice. And this is another day where Savion's looked very explosive and just a lot more. Just explosive, especially as a pass rusher in practices so far this season, and that's a guy who had high expectations heading into last season. I think it's probably safe to say that he didn't quite meet those and didn't quite have the season that he thought he was going to have. That's going to be a very important piece for this team heading into this season. Now as a year two starter and as a big contributor to this defensive line for now heading into his third for our third season. So, I mean, he's going to be extremely important, and the fact that he looked that good against one of the better right tackles in the country, I think it was very promising.
Mm-hmm. So we're actually, I'm glad you said that, because we're going to try a new segment called our Star Player of the Week, and obviously during the season we're going to be picking somebody from LSU's game. In camp, it's a little bit different because, again, we're not seeing all of practice. We don't know who's standing out for the entirety of each camp practice, but somebody that caught our eye, and this week's star player is Savion Jones. Today's star player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. And Savion Jones, he's been playing. He's been somewhat productive for LSU over the first 3 years of his career, but it kind of looks like maybe he's going from just a guy to, maybe a standout and somebody you can really count on, Reed.
Yeah, he's been getting all the first team reps with the D-line. It's been him and Deshaun Womack on the edges, and then Jacoby and Guillory and Gio Paez on the inside. And he certainly looks the part, that's for sure. He definitely pops off the field. He definitely got this large physical presence about him. And, Brian Kelly sort of said last year around this time that he expected Savion Jones to sort of have a breakout year, a monster year. That didn't really come into fruition. LSU struggled to create pressure all year. That wasn't just a Savion Jones problem. It was a problem with the entire front. So this year, under Blake Baker, the goal will be to create pressure. The goal will be to create havoc. It's still to be seen whether LSU can actually do that. And if they do, Savion Jones will be one of the players who will be responsible for that. So, just keep an eye out for him as we see more padded practices, as we see more full team drills. We can look to see exactly how disruptive the defensive line is being, and that'll give us an indicator for how much they've improved over last year. Because right now, we haven't seen a whole lot. It's been tough to glean exactly how much pressure they're creating. But I think as preseason camp goes along, I think we'll start to see some of that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about how stout LSU is at defensive tackle, but on the edges, I think they're more than fine. We've mentioned Savion Jones. I mean, there's Paris Shand, who's coming back for another season. Braden Swinton's been out of practice because due to a Spanish class that he's finishing up with Jalen Lee. So him not being available is sort of opened the door for Deshaun Womack to be there and just to be at that spot. And Deshaun Womack is a former 5-star. So that combined with some of the freshman options they have, I think they have plenty of depth on those edges and a lot of explosiveness there. And Womack is really interesting because, that's a guy who has a really high ceiling as a pass rusher, right? And Swinton was probably one of if not their best one of their better pass rushers last season. So I don't know. It's hard to not feel, at least somewhat optimistic about this edge rushing group heading into the season.
How do you say Wally pipped in Spanish? Do you think he's learning that in class? I'm just kidding. He's not going to lose his spot. But I mean, seriously, how great of a development would that be for the Tigers if they have? I mean, we opened the show with you talking about how aggressive the defense is. Those negative plays on defense make such a huge difference. When you can put an offense behind the sticks and then your defensive ends can pin their ears back a little bit. I think that is one of the keys to the whole LSU season.
And they didn't do a very good job of capitalizing on forcing a team to get behind the sticks. Think about how many times opposing offenses converted those 3rd and 9s, those 3rd and 10s, but it still sort of builds off of your point in that if you can turn that 12-yard gain into a sack or a batted pass, then you're off the field, right? And that's that improved pressure, that capitalizing on those situations where you can just pin your ears back and get after the quarterback. That's going to be huge for this team heading into the season, and I think the edge group it could be a big factor in that. Getting into those 3rd and long situations, that might be something to watch even more closely at for this team in particular because of the situation they have at defensive tackle, and if you can't stop the run, it's harder to get teams into 3rd and long scenarios. Obviously,
Deshaun Womack, probably of all the names we mentioned, he probably has the highest ceiling as a pass rusher. And right now, he's getting really valuable first-team reps that he might not have gotten too many of had Braden Swinson not had to finish his summer class. So that's a positive development for LSU. I think getting him that experience and those reps is probably going to be valuable for him this season.
Yep. We got to take one more break before we wrap things up. We are going to talk about kind of what we're looking for now in the second week of camp as the pads come on a little more often. Now we know maybe the base of what we're looking for, and we'll ask Koki and Reed what they'll be looking for in the next week right after this break.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love, gave me love.
This is the LSU Sports Insider Podcast for Thursday, August the 8th. Subscribe to the LSU Sports on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook as well, and you can go to theadvocate.com/subscribe to read all of these guys' content from camp, as well as our beat writer, Wilson Alexander, who's our number one football writer, and he'll be back on the show next week. I'm going to let you know that today's show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. And today's injury report is also brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. And this is kind of the underrated part of LSU's camp so far. No news is good news on the injury front, guys. I mean, you almost always hear about somebody going down with a soft tissue injury or something that, if not keeping them out for games, at least kind of stunt some of the preparation they get to do for the season. But LSU's had none of that.
Brian Kelly literally knocked on wood on Tuesday, saying he hasn't had any major injuries. The only one we're watching still is Xavion Thomas. He was dressed out yesterday, but he just did some light work off to the side. He's got a little hamstring injury. It might linger throughout the rest of the camp and maybe into the season, but LSU's being cautious with him right now. That's it. Really.
Yeah, and I think Bernard Causey is dealing with something at the moment. We're not quite sure exactly what it is, but he's not a full participant at freshman corner. And really outside of that, and the Spanish class absences, of course, I think that's it.
Yeah, it's again, only been a week, and Brian Kelly will knock on wood for him. We don't want to see anybody get hurt, but so far so good. Now the pads came on yesterday. You tend to see more of that stuff when you get in pads, more contact, that sort of thing. So we'll see. But in that vein, guys, I want to ask you before we sign off, what are you going to look for now? They're back at practice tomorrow. Got, as we said, 2 more weeks before they really start their game week preparation for USC. And at that point, we get to see even less of practice. So in this next week, what's sticking out? Reed, you go first. What are you looking for?
We get to talk to Blake Baker this weekend, and it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say. I'm curious how he would describe the identity of the defense. What does he want it to be, and how is he sort of putting his own stamp on the defense? So that's the next thing that's coming down the pike. We're going to get to talk to him. We're going to get to hear what he has to say. It'll probably be the only time we get to talk to him this season. And obviously his job is critically important for any kind of success that LSU might have this year. It's his job to fix the defense, his job to turn it around. If he can do it quickly, if he can turn it around, then LSU will be competing for a playoff spot. If he can't, if the defense is still struggling like it did last year, then LSU will almost certainly not be in the playoff picture. So it'll be interesting to talk to him, see what he has to say, and then go from there and watch how LSU improves defensively.
Yeah, I'm going to go with something a little bit more niche on the offensive side of the ball. There's been a lot of talk about all these evolutions with the running game, and when we did sort of talk about like what the sort of style of this LSU offense is going to be. Are they going to chuck it deep like they did last year, or is this going to be more of a methodical unit? And I think we sort of landed on the idea of it's probably going to be a little bit of both. You need to do one thing to do the other at the very least, right? So but like specifically, I'm curious to see the role that Chris Hilton's going to play in this offense this season, because I don't think he's necessarily, the numero uno like Kyron Lacey sort of is at the moment. And he's not necessarily a new face the way CJ Daniels or Xavier Thomas are, but he's going to play a big role. And, he's a new number. He's playing more in the slot. He's playing more underneath, which is not something that he's really done during his LSU career. And this is a guy who's been here for a while, has gone through plenty of injuries, but had flashes last season and has had flashes in almost every year of his LSU career, but is someone who, is just showing a much more different diet as a route runner so far. Underneath, I think he could be a real asset in the screen game, just getting him the ball in space and seeing what he can do with the ball in his hands. And obviously we already know he can stretch the field. So I sort of want to hear from others and him about just his evolved role within this offense and how that's going to look throughout the season.
All right, so we will be back on this podcast feed next week. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those. What Perrin always used to say, the 4 finer podcasts are found.
Yep.
I always like that. So if you want the audio-only version, you can check that out. We also encourage you to subscribe at the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Hit the like button for us. Leave a 5-star review. Let us know what you think and what you want to hear as LSU goes through its fall camp here, leading up to the game in Las Vegas against USC here. 3 weeks from Sunday is that game. It's the day before Labor Day, September 1st, right?
September 1st.
Before we go, I want to let you know Tiger Fans Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Like I said, we'll be back next week, your one-stop shop for all your LSU fall camp news. Check out theadvocate.com/LSU. Check out the LSU Sports Insider podcast next week. For our producer, Amelia Cotton, he's Reed Darcey and Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll catch you next time.